On the hunt for comfortable, timeless Western boots? You already know the best place to shop for quality boots is at your local Tacova store. So stop by Tacova's Nashville, at the Mall at Green Hills, or on Broadway by Ryman Auditorium. That's right, you now have 2 locations to choose from. Grab a cold one as you shop and get fitted by a pro. Tacova's Nashville is at your service, and you can find your perfectly fitted dream boots with the help of their expert staff. Everyone will be asking where you got your sick new boots, but I won't be asking because I know they must be Tacova's. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Today on CityCast Nashville, we're here with WNXP Program Director and the host of the new podcast Music Citizens, Jason Moon Wilkins, to introduce you to some of the characters that made Nashville's music scene the ecosystem it is today. I can't take credit for the word ecosystem, Jason said that, but it is a perfect descriptor. And we all love a little character work, so let's get into it and build some statues. This is the 5th and final episode we'll be airing this month about the music community in Nashville, presented by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tacova's. Tacova's knows more than handmade boots and fine Western wear. They've also got an ear for great music, too. From legends of the past to rising stars in the scene, they love supporting musicians and music fans right here in Nashville. So if you're headed for a good time on the stage or in the crowd, go in good boots from Tacova's. And hey, stick around after the interview for our new segment, A Mile in Their Boots, spotlighting people who shape the culture and community of Nashville. Today we'll be going inside a day in the life of Julie Gardner, who has the perfect name to be the greenhouse manager for the beautiful gardens of Cheekwood. It's brought to you by our exclusive launch sponsor, Tacova's. It's August 28th. I'm Grace Fuse, and this is what Nashville's talking about. I really can't wait to talk about Music Citizens. You have this new podcast that just came out. One idea that comes up in the first episode is about how Nashville's music scene may be catering more to tourists than locals, especially as we watch some of these iconic venues fall by the wayside. Do you think that's actually what's coming for us?
Sadly, right now, yes, right? We live in a capitalist society. The market's going to go where the money goes. And right now, the money's going to tourists. And I knew when I said that in the episode, I was like, this will probably ruffle some feathers or cause some level of controversy. But it's also, it's because it's true and it rings out, I think, with people's experiences. My wife and I were down in the Gulch sometime last year. And we walked around and she said something that really hit me. She was like, none of this is for us. And I knew what she meant. This wasn't an old Nashville versus new Nashville discussion, which sometimes that can be a little shallow, honestly. Cities change, they evolve. But it was more about when you look around, it's not only tourist money, but a lot of times it's like expensive tourist money.
Yeah.
You look at the prices of the average restaurant that's being built or the types of music venues being built. And it's cost prohibitive for a local who's just wanting to go out on a night. It used to, I know it's a long time ago, but $5, $10 cover, these things were the standard for a long time because that, music is our social network in Nashville. And you put that in danger when you price it out like it's happening right now.
Just for maybe people that might move here tomorrow, what are some of the iconic venues that they're missing out on that they don't even know that they're missing out on?
Oh, the older ones? Oh, man. One of my favorites was relatively short-lived, but it was a drag bar downtown called Victor Victoria's. That was drag on certain days, and then it was like weird indie rock and experimental stuff on other days because they just let us in there to do shows. It was awesome. Lucy's Record Shop, an independent venue that in the recent Nashville Scene article about women-run and women-owned venues, the folks at Dark Matter were shouting out saying that they wouldn't exist without Lucy's, and a really cool all-ages place that was it was a great place, but it was also a safe space back in the day when very few of those existed. Ace of Clubs downtown was a really cool rock and roll venue where like Keith Urban got his start as like a bluesy gunslinger kind of guy. And I think, the through line in a lot of these is that they were all really different. And they weren't, all right, this is going to sound snarky, but whatever. They weren't putting pictures of the past on the wall to try and like cop cool. They just were cool because they were lived in, I mean, the bathrooms weren't that nice. The floors definitely had stains on them, but they were the character of the people who had come before too.
We've kind of talked about it in previous episode. I'm thinking about this one that we talked about, Brown's Diner with Margaret Littman, who I think wrote that article about women's music venues. But it's kind of this interesting idea of like, do we get something out of the venue being like kind of gross or unpleasant to go to? Like, is there something that makes that more interesting? And I think it's kind of this idea that you just talked about of like, they're not faking history or anything like that. It's just like, it just is lived in. And maybe that's kind of what makes it special, is that you're actually seeing the same stage that Paramore did their first show on, not some kind of amped up, cooler version.
Well, that's why the Ryman is still so great, right? You wouldn't want them to rip up all of that wood. I mean, the seats are kind of uncomfortable, but you know that you're sitting in these same seats that like,
right.
Not to get too woo-woo or whatever, but there's energy around all of that you feel.
So in the first episode of the podcast, you're following the owner-operator of The End, Bruce, who does everything for the place, from turning the beer lights on to booking through his email. But there are a lot of folks behind the curtain that make Nashville's music scene what it is today.
I mean, I have said for years, and I will continue saying it until it happens, there needs to be, it can just be a tiny statue, but a statue of Michael Grimes over in 5 Points in East Nashville for what he did with the slow bar back in the day to completely change people's perception of East Nashville. I mean, it's probably hard for people to think about what that was, but there was Radio Cafe, which was a great venue over in East Nashville too, but Slow Bar was a tipping point for people thinking, oh, I might move over here, or just coming across the river to see music. And for Grimy to be, to sort of get back over into the East Side, I think that was in a way a continuation of what he started with Slow Bar. But also it was an opportunity for that size of venue because it's an ecosystem, right? And you have to have, like we talked about in the podcast, you have to have your starting points like The End, your middle venues and on and on. And he saw the need and he was right for, it's not a direct competitor with the Exit In, but a similar kind of size, because Nashville had grown enough to where we needed a couple of those. Yeah. And so it was more about filling that need.
I think ecosystem is such a perfect word for it. It's funny, like it feels to me, having a bunch of friends that are kind of on the early ages of their music career, that there's this almost like circuit of the kind of classic small venues that people get started at. Obviously, that ecosystem is run by some of these characters like Grimy. I remember so vividly, I played one of the New Faces nights and Grimy was there. It was almost like seeing a celebrity in a very real way. It's really exciting. And in the podcast, you talk about these different characters. Like, that's the whole point, is these music citizens, these people that are behind the music industry in Nashville. And that also, seeps into the music industry outside of Nashville.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head of, there's Grimy, and partially because of who he is and how present he is, but partially because his name is on his store. If, he, God forbid, were to not be on this earth, let's put it that way, tomorrow, there would be obits and there would be people writing about it. The vast majority of people that are part of this web and this ecosystem in Nashville, they would not, from a news standpoint, warrant the obit. And that really was the base level beginning of this idea that I started in concept about 6 years ago when I was still on the news side at WPLN. And the idea evolved over time, but it really was thinking about friends of ours, mutual friends of ours, like Frank Sass, who was longtime sound engineer at the Exit In and then at the Rutledge, who was this amazing character. But when he passed, I think the scene wrote about him, but it wasn't, something that was going to reverberate larger. And I thought, well, what can we do to not only illustrate the key important jobs these folks, do, but in the role they play in this community that we live in? Because when, people have asked me about living here and everyone has complicated feelings about Nashville, like, what's your favorite thing? And it's that community of people. And so it was a way to hopefully honor that community and help tell the stories of these daily jobs that they do. Because the vast majority of stories we hear about the music business are negative. Yeah. And there's a lot of negative to say about the music business, but there's a lot of good too. There's a lot of good people who they do it, like Grimy and like Bruce and like, Frank, because they love it.
Yeah. My first job here was at Douglas Corner Cafe.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Where I know, hilarious. Where I walked by the hiring sign and I was like, I'm going to be an audio engineer and I'm going to convince them to let me run the board. And they were, I said that as I interviewed to be a waitress. And they were like, yeah, sure, whatever. But Mervyn, who ran Douglas Corner Cafe, was very much, again, like one of these characters.
Oh, yeah.
Also, again, like I had so many little dreams when I moved to Nashville in terms of where I thought my music career was going to go. I also wanted to have a live music venue, and I would talk to him about it, and he would be like, "This is not what you think it is. This is my entire life."
No, it's not easy. I'm glad you brought up Mervyn, because that the point of bringing the point of focusing in on Bruce wasn't just to be about Bruce. It was to be about the Bruces. You
yes.
know, there are multiple Bruces in Nashville, and it doesn't mean that he's not unique. He is utterly unique. But it also, to me, shows exactly what you're saying, the precariousness of this. It's a difficult thing to maintain, and not a lot of people want to even sign up for that lifestyle.
No, it's a lot to ask of a person. And I'm wondering, with the people that are going to open music venues tomorrow and for the foreseeable future, like how they're able to do that profitably. And if we can have more Mervyns, or if that's kind of a thing that, you know, or it's grandfathered in and we can't, like, could I be a Mervyn tomorrow? I'd probably not.
And do you want to be? Yeah.
Right. The process of booking is really interesting in these small venues. We talked about it really briefly. There's something that Bruce says in that first episode where you're talking about like how he books his acts, and he's like, is there a better way, or is there a different way to do it? And with that, we have this kind of shift in music venues across the country, but that are going towards these corporate bookers or these outside booking agents that are booking for multiple venues. What does that mean for the Nashville music scene? And like, how have you seen that develop over time?
We have a couple of examples of that, you know, in Nashville, Basement East being one of them, where, you know, a mid-sized venue that has a relationship with a larger corporate booking person, but that's a person and they're on the ground here in Nashville. And I will say that I have mixed feelings about that concept in general, because regardless of how cool people are within a system doesn't care about people so much, right? The system is person agnostic. And what the system wants to do is make sure and maximize profits. And when you get to that, you take people out of the equation, that's how you get these mistakes. And I think that's what our biggest concern is as we see this move being made. There's positives of what, you know, in particular, what's happened with Basement East and their relationship with Live Nation. They've been able to book some really cool stuff in a way that Grimy would be the first to tell you he would not have been able to do because of the prices on some of these artists. And if he misses on 2 or 3 of these shows, like that is completely detrimental and could risk the business entirely. Whereas that is the upside, something like Live Nation. They can take a risk on some artists. And so we've been able to see some really, really cool shows that I don't think would have happened without them. You know, I don't want to paint it as, you know, as binary. It's not black and white.
We're watching right now as Ascend switches operators. It's going to be one of those giant corporate partners. Is there any kind of option there that doesn't feel soulless to you?
I was in the Mayor's Music Council for 8 years. 8 years with Mayor Carl Dean, and it was, you know, this sounds schmaltzy, but it's true. It was an honor, and it was very cool to be able to be a part of that group at a real pivotal time in the city. Mm-hmm. And I remember when we were discussing even where to place Ascend. And I will say the most disappointing thing for me was that the requests for proposals that went out about who could run Ascend didn't cast a wider net. There are choices within that are less obvious that should be explored. Who those people are, it is difficult to run a big venue like that, especially one that's only open, you know, seasonally. There's a lot of advantages with working with someone who is, you know, with a company that's booking those types of venues all across the nation. But there are disadvantages too. It's like when you travel the country now and everything's Dunkin' Donuts and Applebee's. You don't want music to be that way. You don't want it to have the same experience in Nashville that you do in Cincinnati or in Indianapolis. So I think there's probably ways to partner that are creative, that help you get that advantage without sacrificing your identity.
Well, and it's also interesting when you talk about like the idea that Grimy would say that he's not capable of booking certain shows. I mean, I guess the Basement still operates with Gil just booking. So you have the Basement and the Basement East kind of operating in different parallel lines in terms of booking, which is interesting.
And that's it's a 100% different risk factor. You know, you can run OG Basement with a couple of people, and if only 20 or 30 folks show up and you don't sell that much at the bar, like you didn't really lose anything that night. You know, very different for the Basement East, which has a bigger staff. And you're also, if you're a band coming through there, you're asking for a whole lot more money and guarantees. So you've got to fill those butts and seats, as they say.
And it also obviously is, as concert goers, gives us more opportunities to see a wider range of artists. Yeah. So we have these kind of opportunities for discovery. Having a room where it's okay if the 20 people show up is the only way that we let these artists in the ecosystem into the beginning, which is, I'm so glad that Nashville has those things still.
Yeah, you need reps, I mean, not to get all sports analogy here, but you need, and we've seen this a lot on the WNXP side, artists whose recordings are very cool, songs are really good, some of it born out of pandemic times, but they didn't have the live reps. And then they come to the city and honestly, like, don't deliver. And I feel bad for them, right? That's like the first exposure some of these folks have to fans. It's like, oh, but you're absolutely right. A venue like the OG Basement, a venue like the End, Dee's Country Cocktail Lounge, these types of venues where you can go play to a smaller audience, get your stuff together and develop followings and develop your identity as much as anything. Everybody's got to find their own voice, and it's a very different experience, bringing that music to life outside the studio.
What can we do to preserve some of these small music venues as concert goers?
Yeah, I think, supporting it is the obvious answer. But I do think that there are interventions, and this is where someone like Chris Cobb, with his work with the independent venues associations that are out there, could speak very directly to very specific things that he has seen other government organizations do. So there are things on a larger scale, but as far as like what we can do individually, going and supporting it. And this is not directly answering your question. Sounds like I'm running for office, but I think one of the more fascinating things that I've seen is how do you deal with the reality of rising rents, changing demographics, all that stuff that impact what people even want out of these spaces. And one of the cool things that I've seen people do is they essentially add historical component to it. So you could visit the place during the day to see, it's almost like a tiny museum or, I think there are creative ways people are looking to save spaces like, I can't imagine the Station Inn going away, but I also can imagine, someone trying to do something about that. And I think putting sometimes some historic framework and different essentially revenue models for these venues outside of what can be a difficult thing to maintain, which, as Bruce said in his interview with us during the podcast, it's beer sales for him. That's how he makes money, Yeah. As things get more and more expensive, that's difficult to have that be your only revenue.
We're really excited to keep listening to the Music Citizens podcast. We know you're only one episode in, but what do you hope people will take away from the series in general?
When we think about the storylines in the show, what we're really looking for is, let's get inside some of these jobs that have, look, you're going to a show and you wonder how something works, or you wonder what this person does or whatever. I love being able to, my curiosity to answer those questions for people. So that's a layer. Then there is, who these people are and their journeys. And then, the other layer is that sort of secondary role someone plays within the community. In the case of who I mentioned earlier, Frank Sass, the sound man who passed away, he was also this person who helped bands figure out what they were doing on stage. He was brutal. He was the soup Nazi of sound men, but you walked away from those experiences a better musician. And everyone, when they had his wake over at the East Side Bowl, that's what people talked about. And so those are the types of stories we want to tell. But it's going to vary. What's really fun about the audio medium is, it's like you can really play with sound. And we're looking forward to being able to tell stories that are about the live side, they're about the recording side, all the different aspects of it, and really getting into, hopefully creating an experience for people to feel like they're inside of that.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear more. I love knowing the characters behind the music industry in Nashville because it's everyone, really. And I'm just so thankful for your time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Grace. I really appreciate it.
And hey, don't go anywhere. In just a second, our executive producer, Whitney Pastrek, will be walking a mile in the boots of Cheekwood greenhouse manager Julie Gardner, sponsored by Tecovas.
Hey y'all, it's CityCast executive producer Whitney Pastrek here with Julie Gardner, who is the greenhouse manager at Cheekwood Estate and Gardens, one of the most beautiful places in Nashville. Julie, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Can you just describe for someone who's never been to Cheekwood what it is and how your job fits into that?
Cheekwood is considered a country estate and garden. It was built in 1929 by Leslie and Mabel Cheek as their home. They were lucky enough to inherit the Maxwell House coffee fortune.
Oh.
And were able to purchase this property and build, I guess you would call it a Georgian style house on 55 acres. And in the mid 60s, one of the Cheeks sold it to Friends of Cheekwood for the intent for the house to become a museum. Since then, it's been a operating art collection in the house and surrounded by gardens.
And that's where you come in.
And that's where I come in.
So you started as a landscape specialist and have sort of worked your way up to the greenhouse. Talk about how you got into that line of work and what drew you to it.
I kind of fell into it many, many years ago. It was the summer before my 5th year at UT Knoxville, and I was looking for a summer job. My cousin said, "Hey, I'm working outside at Crescent Bend. Crescent Bend is a historic house with gardens in Knoxville. You should come work there." And I was like, "Okay, sure, that sounds like fun." I started at Crescent Bend, and it was the best job I ever had. I stayed with it because I enjoyed it so much, and I enjoyed being outside in nature and actually seeing the results of your actions every day. After I graduated from UT, my father had many sit downs with me. "Julie, you need to go get a real job." I went and got a real job. I moved here to Nashville in 1990 for my real job. And after about 3 years of being miserable, I quit.
Right on.
And went back to the horticultural industry. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Well, let's walk a mile in your boots. What does a day in the life of the greenhouse manager at Cheekwood look like?
Well, let's see. Today, I started out, I had to spray for spider mites on some palms. So I did that this morning. That usually takes a good, hour and a half out of your morning. I did that. Next thing I did, I've got to continue to fill flats for our violas, which come in September. So I've got to fill 548 flats full of soil. So when the violas come in, the actual viola plugs, I can just plant them directly into the soil. So it makes it go quickly. And before I came in here to talk to you, I was outside watering. So it's just kind of a little this, that, and the other all day.
What's your favorite species of plant or type of plant or flower to take care of? What do you wake up every day and you're excited to go see how your friend is doing?
I love some salvias. And I love some violas and pansies. I love those pansy faces.
How do you see your work and Cheekwood as a whole as integral to the culture of Nashville?
I see us as a place that all of Nashville can come and experience beauty, in a sense. And maybe people aren't aware of what goes into that. Like, for example, the color garden, it's a year in the planning of changing out from our summer to our mums to the violas and tulips. That's all planned about a year in advance. So there's a lot of background work that goes into it to go into those change outs every year. But it's a place of beauty that people should come, whether it's in the spring for the tulips, for the summer, for the, blaze of color in the color garden, for the fall, just the great color change of the leaves. I mean, I think everybody would get something out of it.
CityCast Nashville is not just a news show. We're also about great recommendations for things to do around the city. So, Julie, when your day is done, when you've got all those viola plugs in and all the spider mites are on the run, where do you like to go to relax or have fun?
Basically, I'm a real homebody. I really am. I started thinking about that last night. I thought, what do I do for fun? I go home. I go be with my dog. That's what I do. I was thinking, nothing is greater fun than taking my dog out to the field and that mouth open and that tongue hanging out, running in that grass. That for me is great fun. Or I also like to go to Beeman Park a lot.
Oh, I love Beeman Park. And hey, y'all, go check out cheekwood.org to learn more. They have, aside from the beautiful gardens, so many fantastic events. They have concerts. They have times you can bring your dog. They've got great lights in the wintertime. And we'll have that link for you in our show notes as well. So you'll just be a click away. Thank you so much for your time, Julie. Get back to those plants.
I will. I got to go water.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. Go check out Music Citizens wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed this show, why not tell a friend? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye!